Well, good evening. Welcome to Guantanamo Bay, Human Rights Lawyering and the Mauritanian, a conversation with Nancy Hollander. I'm Karen Engle, and I teach human rights and international law here at Texas Law, and also with Neville Hode, co-direct the Bernard and Audrey Rapoport Center for Human Rights and Justice. We are very pleased to be co-hosting this event tonight with the Human Rights Law Society, which is our student human rights organization on campus. And we're grateful, especially to Grayson Myers, who is a human rights scholar at the Rapoport Center as a second-year student. And she's also events coordinator for the Human Rights Law Society. She's done much of the organizing work on behalf of both organizations, and we're extremely grateful for that. And I'll say she's been helped by a number of people to whom we're also grateful, but just call out Nina Ebner and Sabrina Barton. And you'll get to hear from Grayson in a bit. So it's a real honor to have Nancy Hollander in our midst this evening to discuss her work. She is originally from Texas, as many of you may know, and we are very much wanting to get her here in person, and we will create a program to do that soon. We had hoped to do that with this program, but we just thought that given COVID, a 3+ hour movie and talkback program without popcorn and breaks might not have been such a good idea. So Nancy's been wonderfully flexible, and we really appreciate that and appreciate your willingness to work with us. We hope that you've all had a chance to watch the film, The Mauritanian, about Mohamedou Ould Slahi's long detention in Guantanamo Bay, and about Nancy Hollander's representation of him. And if you have not been able to watch it yet, know that if you're connected to the University of Texas, that we did buy the film for you to be able to watch for the next year. Also, just this whole program will be a spoiler alert, but I assume that you know that. Jodie Foster, who's not quite as well known as Nancy, did represent Nancy in the film and won a Golden Globe Award for her performance. And I'm sure that we'll get a chance to talk about, we will talk about various aspects of the film as well as Nancy's career this evening. So here's how we'll proceed. After we introduce Nancy, then 3 of us will interview her about particular topics. Grayson, whom I just mentioned to you, will discuss with Nancy a bit about the movie and the portrayal of her in it and of her client. Then Ranjana Natarajan, who mostly, because she's on leave right now, but generally directs the Civil Rights Clinic at UT and has been involved in Guantanamo litigation since her time at the ACLU in Los Angeles. We'll talk with Nancy about the US's use of torture and about Gitmo and related litigation more broadly. And then I, as someone who's written critically about the human rights movement's embrace of criminal law for the enforcement of human rights, am excited to have the chance to talk to Nancy about what it's like to be a human rights lawyer in a variety of venues, including in the context of international criminal law. So we've made this a Zoom meeting so that we can see the audience and you can see each other and engage. So you're welcome to have your cameras on if you like, and you're welcome to ask questions. And you can even put them in the chat along the way. So I'll have more to say about that after we finish our sort of the planned part of the program. But for now, just know that if you send a message to everybody, we'll try to keep an eye out on that for them, particularly as they might relate to some of the questions that we're talking about. And if not, we'll try to get to them toward the end. And we do have some time saved at the end to take and address audience questions. So it's now my pleasure to recognize Molly Buckley, who is a 2L as well, and a vice president of the Human Rights Law Society. Before law school, Molly worked as the paralegal for the ACLU's National Security Project, which intersected with Nancy Hollander's work, as she'll tell us maybe a bit about, but she has the honor of introducing Nancy for us. So take it away, Molly.
Thank you, Karen. And yeah, it is my pleasure to introduce Nancy Hollander. Nancy won't remember this, but we never worked together directly. When I was at the ACLU, I was a paralegal of the National Security Project and got to speak to you once or twice on the phone when you were looking for my boss trying to speak about this case. So I read the book. I was missed litigation that the movie depicted, but I was just in time to celebrate Mohamedou's release and transfer to Mauritania. So I have long admired you and I really appreciate you being with us. But by way of introduction, Nancy Hollander is an internationally recognized criminal defense attorney and a partner at Freedman, Boyd, Hollander and Goldberg P.A. in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She is well known for representing individuals and organizations accused of crimes the government deems related to national security. In addition to her work with Mohamedou Ould Slahi, who is depicted in The Mauritanian, Nancy has also won the 2017 release of whistleblower Chelsea Manning and 2 cases in the European Court of Human Rights on behalf of current Guantanamo detainee Rahim Al-Nashiri. She's on the list of counsel for the International Criminal Court, as well as the Department of Defense's pool of qualified civilian defense counsel for military commissions. We are so incredibly lucky to have you with us today. So I will thank you for joining us and pass it off to Grayson, who's going to begin our programming.
Thank you. It's great to be here. So go ahead, Grayson.
Okay, great.
Fire away.
Okay, so like Professor Engle said, I am going to begin with questions about the movie. And if you have a question you'd like to ask in regards to the Mauritanian, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll incorporate it into our little conversation. Okay, so to begin, a quick recap of the movie if you were unable to watch it. The film starts with Mohamedou's capture from his home in Mauritania shortly after 9/11 in 2001. It then focuses on the years between 2005 and 2010 and your representation of him in Guantanamo, where he was being held without charge during that time. The film cuts out a great deal of your career and his story by focusing on these years. Are there any crucial aspects of either story that the limited time frame of the film left out, Nancy?
Well, there's a lot the film had to leave out, and it got some time smushed together, and some people smushed together, as it were, because it's 2 hours of 14 years, basically. What I wish it could have shown, and there just wasn't time, was our relationship, which was more than just we were hostile at the beginning. I was never hostile like Jodie is. And Jodie says that every time she talks, she says, I'm a way meaner Nancy than Nancy is, although some people might differ about that. But, Mohamedou and I spent so much time together over those years when nothing was happening in his case. And so it wasn't like we were kind of hostile at the beginning, and then when I found out that the government agreed that he wasn't guilty, all of a sudden I cared about him. I always cared about him, but movies have to have an arc, and that was the arc this movie put in. If you ask Mohamedou if he trusted us, mostly Terry Duncan and I, he would say he had no choice. What was he going to do? Not trust us? He was so hopeful for anything. So he did trust us. And it's hitting that's causing some backfire. But he did trust us from the beginning. We trusted him. I mean, he wasn't going to harm us, but we didn't know if what he said was true. And it's just hard to put all that together. Colonel Couch and I also never met until later. But he and I actually did a program together just about a month ago in New York. And we've become friends over this. And I want to say one other thing, which is for Terry Duncan's benefit. Terry is now doing death penalty work. She would never have cared whether a client was guilty or innocent. But there was a third lawyer who did leave. And so Terry agreed to basically take a hit for the movie and be both of those people. So there's a lot of those things that happen, but fundamentally it's accurate. All the torture is accurate. It's just not enough of it. But what it has is accurate. And the basic overview of the story is accurate.
Yes, I wanted to ask a little bit about, I feel like Mohamedou's guilt or innocence was really played up, especially in regards to Terry's character. But it's interesting to hear that that wasn't truly the case.
Well, Terry and I are criminal defense lawyers, and so it never matters. If someone had actually come to me and said what she said in the movie, I wouldn't have been as hostile as Jodie, but I would have said, you are off this case and you should reconsider whether you can be a criminal defense lawyer. I will tell you that the statement at the end of that segment, where I turn away and I say, you've got to believe your own shit, Jodie says it, those are my words, came right out of my mouth. And I guess when she met with me, she had a little notebook, and it must have been one of the things that I said, because that's me. I do believe, I do think you have to believe your own shit when you're a criminal defense lawyer. You have to have some psychosis that you can really win no matter how bad the case is.
Mm-hmm. So even within what made it into the film and what didn't, within that 5-year time period that the film really focuses on, are there any parts of the film that ended up on the cutting room floor that you think should have been included in the film?
Well, I don't know. I think I've kind of answered that. Mohamedou wrote the book in 2005, didn't get published until 2012. And the film ends with his winning his habeas case, and then it just overviews that he didn't get out for 7 more years. During that 7 years, we just kept litigating and litigating and litigating and getting nowhere. And then finally, the way he got out, which isn't in the film at all, which is really, the ACLU joined us in right before the first hearing. And I insisted that the film say that. And that was it wasn't a fight, but I just kept saying, it's got to be in there, got to be in there. And then the ACLU played a much bigger role going forward. There was a petition the ACLU did, and then there was the periodic review board. And at the periodic review board is how Mohamedou got out ultimately. And the ACLU, mostly Hina Shamsi, had a great deal to do with that. We had to meet with the State Department after they said he could be released and figure out how he was going to get released. And Terry and I are not good at dealing with State Department people, particularly. But Hina is much more diplomatic than either of us. And so she was the one who went and talked about, this is what we're going to do, etc. So all of that is not in the movie.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. We have a few questions in the chat that I'm going to read. Molly is interested in the relationship your character had with opposing counsel, who later stepped down on moral grounds. That seemed unusual. Did that really happen? And did he tip you off as to box 32?
Yes, it really happened. And no, he didn't tip us off to box 32. It did happen. We learned about him when the article came out that said the conscience of the colonel. I had talked to the reporter, Jason, I can't remember his last name, but I had talked to him because we actually gave him one of Mohamedou's letters, but I didn't really know everything he was going to write. And it was there that we learned about Colonel Couch. It was there that we learned that Mohamedou was facing the death penalty, which we didn't know. But that all happened with him in 2004, and we didn't come into the case until 2005. I don't know why Kevin, our director, decided to give it to Stu Couch to find the polygraphs. I can't remember why, but there was some good reason. But in fact, of course, we found them because it was Mohamedou who knew he had taken them. But it took a lot of litigation to get them, motions to compel over and over again until we finally got them. And the questions on one are still classified, but I can never remember which one, so I don't talk about them much.
And then someone else would like to know, when did the torturing finally stop?
Well, what we call the torture time was between 2003 and 2004. By the time we got there in 2005, the active torture that you see in the movie was over, but he was still in solitary confinement the rest of the time. And he was always terrified up until the moment he left that it could start again.
Mm-hmm. And everyone can feel free to send their questions to the bigger group chat, not directly to me, if you'd like. Okay. And Nancy, what was it like having yourself and your lawyering portrayed in a film, and by Jodie Foster nonetheless?
Well, I never believed we'd have anyone like Jodie Foster in this movie. It was when I heard that she was going to play me, I really couldn't believe it. I mean, everybody knows who Jodie Foster is, right? Or at least everybody my age. Some people who are younger don't know, because I've encountered some people who say, who is she? But it was amazing. And she's an amazing woman. We haven't spent a great deal of time together, but she did this movie because she cared about it, not because she was going to make any money on it. And she did meet with me once in London, once in my apartment. We exchanged emails about various things. For example, she asked me something that would be obvious to a lawyer, but not necessarily to her. She said, when you're arguing about a case, would you have it in front of you and would you be pointing to it or quoting from it? And I said, yes. And so in the movie, that's what she's doing when she's talking about the Boumediene case, and she points to it and what it says. But she didn't know that that's what would happen in a courtroom. So those are the kinds of things. But it's just like a dream come true. And she's been so gracious when people have asked her to speak. At the beginning, she spoke at a lot of junkets that we did on Zoom over and over and over. And she spoke last year to the American College of Trial Lawyers, where I was speaking, and they asked her to interview, to do an introduction. She's really an exceptional person, and the whole team of actors. Tahar Rahim, who plays Mohamedou, is also a brilliant actor. And some of you, if you're old movie buffs, will remember him from a French movie called A Prophet. If you've never seen it, it's worth seeing. I saw some people nod that they had seen it. It's really a good film. And he's just a gentle, lovely guy. The only one I didn't meet, because Mohamedou and I were in South Africa for the filming at a different time than he was, is Benedict Cumberbatch. I've never met him, but I met all the others.
How has engaging with Hollywood and these actors affected your career now, and just how the case has been handled? Well,
we originally thought the movie would help get him out, because I signed the contract when he was in prison, 2015, right after I signed the contracts for the book. And the book, I think, did help get him out, but the movie, I lost interest in it because he was out. What did I care about? We didn't care about it. And then all of a sudden, Kevin McDonald attached and the various actors attached, and it was a thing. And so now what Mohamedou and I have said over and over again is that we wanted to bring the conversation of Guantanamo back so that we can get the other 39 gentlemen out who are stuck there, and most of whom should never have been there in the first place, half of whom have now been cleared for release, one of them for over 10 years. So that's what we hope the movie will do. As for my career, it hasn't brought me any cases, if that's what you're saying. It brought me a lot of people who thought they had issues, but their issues were, I've got this thing implanted in my brain, I've got it implanted in my tooth, I've got something implanted in my knee, the Havana syndrome happened to me, they're chasing me. I mean, it was all people who had excessive paranoia, to put it mildly. And my paralegal said she would need, extra pay for having to deal with all these letters. But I've done a lot of these. I continue to do these. I continue to talk about the film wherever and whenever I can, because I want more people to get interested in Guantanamo.
Mhm. We have a question in the chat. Someone read in The Guardian that you and Mohamedou could not bear to witness some of the shooting in Cape Town. How did you and he negotiate emotionally the reconstruction of the detention center, its visceral memories, and so on? Oh, its visceral memories and so on.
That's a good question, because when I walked in and saw that walk into the prison with the green stuff on both sides, I gasped. I said, Mohamedou, it's exactly what it was like. And right there, I said to him, right there was the little place where you stuck your finger in and had a little hole and you could see out and see me coming. And I mean, I really gasped to see how well they had done it. And of course, he didn't know any of it. They had to talk to other people to do that, or he only knew about his particular little hut. But we watched two scenes. We watched other scenes, but the two that I remember, because one scene takes all day to do, was what they call the fight scene and the coming together scene. The scene where, he says, I don't have to do anything. You can't make me. He's screaming at me, which of course he never did. He never screamed at me. And then the scene where I put my hand on him and say, I just want to be with you. And the first one we watched and kind of laughed and said, I was never that stern and you were never that angry. But the second one we cried. We sat and watched it. The weather was terrible in South Africa. It was so windy, but we were in a little hut watching it on the monitor. And we just sat there and cried watching it. There was one other scene that I watched, Mohamedou didn't, and it's the prisoners coming off the C-130 at the beginning when they first get there to Guantanamo. And the prisoner who was portraying Mohamedou was an extra. And when they put the hood on him, he said no, he couldn't do it. And they had to get another one. Mohamedou kept commenting that the guards looked so real that he was kind of afraid of them. And I said the same thing. And these were just extras from South Africa. And, I said, I think I should go up and say, yes, sir. And that dog that's barking and being ferocious, I asked the guy about his dog and he said, oh yeah, he's a lovely dog. Take him for a walk. And, it was just bizarre. I've never been on a set. There were over 100 people on that set at any given day. We were only there, Mohamedou was there a little longer, but I was there for 3 days, but he didn't want to watch any more of it. And so we went to see the penguins instead.
Thank you so much for sharing. This has been really fascinating. I'm now going to pass it over to Ranjana to talk a little bit more about torture and the Guantanamo Bay litigation in general.
Thank you, Grayson. Nancy, it's a pleasure to talk with you again today. I thought I would start with kind of unpacking a little bit more the torture issue, which I see someone has a chat question as well. So the movie really effectively portrays the extensive torture that Mr. Slahi experienced, but we also know that this was part of a very huge program by the government, by the US government, that took years to even in part actually reveal and repudiate. And so as a human rights lawyer, what are the lessons you draw, having worked on this case and the other Guantanamo case, about our democracy, about our rule of law, because torture happened and it happened for so long, and we all thought that we were sure that torture was not supposed to happen under human rights law and indeed under domestic law. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what is the legacy of the US torture program in Guantanamo, in Bagram, in Iraq, and the other places where torture occurred.
Well, thanks, Ranjana, and it's great to see you again. this is not the first time the US has been involved in torture. This has been a continuing thing since the beginning of this country. And it's certainly not the first time the CIA has been involved in torture. And it's not the first time in the black sites, nor is it the first time the Department of Defense military has been involved in torture. And of course, in Mohamedou's case, it was the military primarily who were torturing him. It was a shock to me to see how bad it was. And I remember going to see the Tower of London in London, and some people standing next to me saying, "Oh my God, that's terrible what they did in the 16th century." And I wanted to turn to them and say, that's what they just did to my client, 2 years ago. But the other thing we have to remember is that the main torture of Mohamedou, the head of it, was a guy named Richard Zuley. Richard Zuley was a cop from Chicago, and he was part of a crew of cops who, it's only come out fairly recently in the 60s and 70s, were torturing mostly young Black kids, men and boys. There would be a murderer somewhere in the south side of Chicago, and they'd pick up the first Black kid they found, torture him until he confessed. And some of those people are still in jail. I'm aware of one that Mohamedou and I are now helping his lawyer, and he's been in jail for 30 years. So Zuley, who is Captain Collins in the movie and is Captain Collins in reality, I mean, that's who he was in Guantanamo also, he's the head of it. So he brought what he knew to Chicago, and then Guantanamo became a training ground for the Black sites. But after the shock of seeing it, which I'd never seen before, I got more interested in the history of what the CIA has done in South America and et cetera, and how we have trained military forces in many other countries. So, yes, it's not supposed to happen. It's not supposed to happen here. We have to keep fighting to make it not happen, but we're not anywhere near that yet.
And that's a great point, because one of the things that happened, I think, in our pop culture as a result of, the widely established torture in Guantanamo and other places, is that it really pervaded our national mainstream in the years following 9/11 in some very disturbing ways, which I know you must have also noticed over the years. Somebody has asked a question in the chat that says, so, it's been well established that the military tortured prisoners, and what do we know about whether anyone will ever be ultimately held responsible? This has been one of the big disappointments. So maybe you can talk about that, Nancy.
Sure. The Convention Against Torture, which the US has signed, says that the torturers or the alleged torturers, the accused torturers, should be prosecuted, and that the people who are tortured should get damages, neither of which has happened in this country. Right now, we're involved in a case in the International Criminal Court. It's called the Afghanistan situation, but it's broader than that. It involves the Taliban and what they did to Afghans, and then it also involves what happened in the Black sites that the CIA did. And my other client, Rahim Al-Nashiri, is a victim in that case. However, it's clear, they're never going to be able to get the CIA people as long as they stay in the US, but they're never going to be able to travel, which is true of many people. They can't travel to places like Germany, which has declared that it has universal jurisdiction and just prosecuted someone, Syria, for example. But what's happened in the ICC is that where it's going so slowly that I don't know what's ultimately going to happen there. But we also have learned that the Brits have a tribunal that sole purpose is to investigate the abuses of their Secret Service, which is what we know as MI6, kind of like the CIA, or they have a new name now, but I know them as MI6. And it turns out they interrogated prisoners, either directly or through the CIA. And we believe they interrogated our client, and Parliament, the British Parliament, found that they had no right to do that because they knew they were being tortured. So, you know, we've been able to get accountability. The European court cases lay out in very detailed terms what they believe happened. I can't comment on whether it's true or not, but that's it's worth reading those opinions. And my client, Mr. Al-Nashiri, has received 200,000 euros for his family from that court, and we're about to go after a third country. So we've been able to do that, but they can never get the US to do anything. They send the MLATs, the mutual legal, what are they called? What is an MLAT? Come on, students. Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, is that what it is? Is that right?
I think so.
Something like that.
Yeah, yes, it is.
That's what exactly. Thank you, Michael. But it's where one country asks another country for assistance, and generally they give it. The US has said no to everyone from all those countries. We will not help you. We will not make the prisoner available to you. We will not let you interview him. Nothing. The US has just completely closed up. So as far as I'm concerned, we are not one of the good countries. We're one of the bad countries. And, you know, to the young law students, don't give up. Let's make it one of the good countries.
So I see there's some other torture questions, but I wanted to turn slightly to some of the other rule of law violations that we see through the movie, and that, of course, you know intimately through working on his and Mr. Al-Nashiri's case. So the movie shows how in Guantanamo, the government effectively undid due process protections that had been developed over centuries, you know, almost from the Magna Carta. The right to a lawyer, to know the charges against you, to cross-examine the evidence, to have an impartial judge. Rights that, you know, in some ways, I think didn't really come into sort of practice until maybe the 1960s or 70s. But looking forward, do you think there have been lessons learned so that we are not going to go back to the Guantanamo experience in terms of incommunicado detention, no access to counsel, you know, kangaroo sort of military courts made out of whole cloth? Do you think those lessons have been learned and will be enduring? Or do you think, as with torture, you know, these lessons have to be learned over and over again and we have to fight really hard? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, the military commissions have been a complete failure. And what people don't realize, I actually was talking to Colonel Couch about this today, and he didn't understand this. There is no right to confrontation because the Constitution doesn't apply. How can we have a court system that involves the military and the Department of Justice, and there's no confrontation? I mean, even Justice Scalia gave us a long lecture on confrontation in, I think it was the Crawford case or one of those. You know, it's bedrock in this country. It may not be in every other country, but it is for us. All they have and all they plan to use in Mr. Al-Nashiri's case is hearsay and double hearsay. So-and-so said to so-and-so while he was being tortured in the Yemeni prison that such and such happened, and there's an FBI agent who's going to describe it to the members. Now, this is not, people think this is what military justice is. The Uniform Code of Military Justice is almost the same as the federal system. Very little difference. In some ways, it's a little better. Some ways, it's not quite as good. But it's not what these military commissions are. And I mean, there's no right to speedy trial, for example. These people have been there how many years now? And doesn't matter. It's written out of the system. There is no right to have the time you spent in prison apply toward your sentence. In fact, it says it doesn't apply toward your sentence. You know, who'd have believed these things? It's just inconceivable, and it's a failure. And the one thing I think almost everyone agrees is that it's a failure. So I hope we won't have those kinds of commissions again. They're not supposed to happen unless you're at war or something. You don't have a court system that functions. But will we have incommunicado prisons? I don't know. Do we have them in other places that we don't even know about? We don't know. They could still be out there somewhere. We don't know. The US has refused to even declassify where the black sites were, refused to assist the European Court of Human Rights in getting any information about them. So when a country says didn't happen here, it's up to the court to decide whether it happened or it didn't, getting no information. And I don't know. And President Biden has not helped us. One person has gotten out. That's it. Obama didn't help us in a couple of ways that people don't realize. Number one, his Department of Justice appealed almost every habeas case that was won. And there were 70% of them were winning. His Department of Justice, all they had to do was nothing, and those people would have walked out. If they had done nothing, Mohamedou would have been saved 7 years that he spent in prison. And the other thing people don't realize is, why is it that so many of the people there now are Yemeni? Well, it's because, do you all remember I don't remember what year it was. Michael probably knows because he always knows everything. But the guy who flew over Detroit and tried to light his underwear on fire, you remember that? And didn't, and they were successful. He was Nigerian, but he was trained by a guy in Yemen who was Yemeni, but who actually grew up in Las Cruces, New Mexico, by the way, El Americani. So at that moment, President Obama said, none of the Yemenis go home. And now they're still there. What can I say?
Well, thank you, Nancy. I think that we got to talk a little bit about the human rights bodies. You alluded a bit to the European Court of Human Rights decisions and so forth, but I'm going to turn it over to Karen to maybe take the conversation from there.
Great. Thank you so much. And I see a couple of questions in the chat, and Jamie, we'll get to yours after this. I think that the one from Olivia Kickert, you already started to answer, but I would love to talk to you about the various venues you've practiced in front of as a human rights lawyer. And you have told us about taking Al-Nashiri's case to the European Court of Human Rights. And in the two cases, right, with Poland and Romania, that he did get the 200,000 euro, 100,000 euros each, I think, in each one. And also maybe that the state was supposed to get assurance from the United States that they wouldn't execute him, I think was part of it.
Yes, that's true. I cannot confirm that those are actually the countries that we're talking about, but yes, part of what the European Court has said, and those cases are still pending, by the way, because they have not gotten assurances from the US that he won't get the death penalty.
Right. So I wonder, I'd love to hear you, because he's still in Guantanamo, still, despite your best efforts, subject to the military commissions. Could you tell us why you decided to go to the European Court of Human Rights, and what you hoped, in addition to those remedies, to get from it, and maybe the impact that it might have on the cases in the US?
Sure. Originally, it was Amrit Singh at the Justice Initiative of the Soros Foundation, who came to me and said, we would like to take Mr. Al-Nashiri's case to the European Court. And I said that they could do that as long as I stayed on the case, because I wanted to make sure nothing interfered with his criminal case. And so that's really how it started. And Amrit then hired local counsel in the two countries, The case proceeded. I worked with them. I did not provide any classified information, although the agency and I got into a little tiff about it, but I didn't. And I do know that my client, Rahim Al-Nashiri, wanted accountability, and it was important to him and is still important to him. He's got nowhere in his case, nowhere. I mean, they aren't anywhere through their pretrial. And if you follow his case, which is a whole other thing we could talk about for hours, but you can look it up, read Carol Rosenberg's articles about him, or the Court of Appeals opinion about the judge, Colonel Spaeth, who hid from the defense that he was applying for a job with the Department of Justice while he was prosecuting, while he was the judge on the case they were prosecuting. He's gotten nowhere. We found cameras, we found hidden microphones. At one point, we were told not to talk about anything to the client, but we weren't allowed to tell the client why, because it was classified. I mean, the case is absurd. And the only thing that gives him hope is what we do in Europe. And if you've ever represented someone on death row, it's hard for them to trust their lawyers, understandably, because the lawyers often don't get anywhere. But when I get somewhere, when I can tell him, look at this, and we're going to be able to send your mother this money, and I'm going to go see her, it gives him hope, and he communicates better with his military commission counsel, which is really important. It's all I can do for him. I can't get him out, but I can at least give him some assurance that the world knows what happened to him, and give his family 200,000 euros. And we're hoping to get another 100,000 sometime this year.
All right, thank you. So I want to, maybe we'll go to where I think the Olivia Kickert's question is, and what I kind of mentioned at the beginning, and you've already alluded to in terms of your representation of Al-Nashiri at the ICC. But before we get there, or maybe in discussing it, you've been quite involved as a criminal defense lawyer in working on criminal defense at the international level too, and with the International Criminal Tribunal. So you've done training for defense lawyers representing clients before international criminal tribunals. I know you're serving on an ABA committee now looking at the international criminal procedures and human rights. I think a lot of human rights lawyers kind of took the turn to think that criminal prosecution of perpetrators, human rights violators, was the best way to achieve justice. And I think part of it was because it seemed concrete, and you could actually see something happen it was much better than the naming and shaming. But along with that, there were a lot of concerns that you've had, and I'd love to hear you talk about those and about the kind of traction you've gotten in expressing them.
Well, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I don't like anybody to get prosecuted for anything almost all the time. However, there are a few exceptions in my mind. People who harm animals, and people who are government agents who torture. I think they should be prosecuted. And I would like to see these people prosecuted. We don't know, what I'm afraid of though, is that what happens is the lower level people get prosecuted, which is what happened in Abu Ghraib. We don't ever get up to the Rumsfelds and Cheneys, or even the people just below them who order this. The colonels, the CIA station chiefs, Rodriguez, for example, Gail, what's her name, who became head of the CIA after she destroyed the tapes of the torture of my client and Abu Zubaydah. And she said, well, I did it because I was told to do it. Well, I don't think that has been an excuse since Nuremberg. right? You know, I was told to do it. But it's distressing to me that they're not going to get prosecuted. On the other hand, it's weird for me to be on the side of the prosecution. I've never been on that side before. I've never represented a victim. And in the international courts and in the European courts, victims have a much bigger role to play than they do in our courts. And we're glad as criminal defense lawyers that they don't have that big a role, because it tends to interfere with the rights of our client. But, you know, if we can't prosecute anyone, then it's going to continue. It's going to continue. I'll tell you who I'd really like. There was a doctor ordered to be there, not a corpsman, not a nurse, not a PA, not an MA, a physician had to be in the room when they were waterboarding with a trach kit. You know what a trach kit is? That's how you open up the throat if the person is drowning, if you can't breathe. They had to be there. That was one of the orders. You'll find it in the torture papers. And I want to know who that doctor was. I really do want to know what went through the mind of this doctor watching someone be tortured. But you know, it's much more complicated than that, because torturers suffer too. They suffer PTSD. They have all these issues. There's a Carl Sandburg poem about the hangman. What does the hangman do when he goes home at night? Does he play with his children? You know, does he look at the moon with his little kids? What does he do when he goes home after he's executed someone? And we know that there's conflicts on both sides, and the only way out of it is to not torture people. And to insist that our government, we can't solve the rest of the world, but we can insist that our government actors do not ever treat people this way. And Colonel Couch, someone asked me earlier, and I didn't really answer it. Colonel Couch is a retired Marine lieutenant colonel. I think he may be retired as a colonel. Colonel Couch was the bravest Marine I have ever encountered, because he walked up to his supervising commanding officer and said, "I won't do this." Do you know what that takes for a Marine to do that? And he said, "I won't do it because," and he based it on his Christianity and his humanity and the fact that every human being has dignity. Now, he went on actually to prosecute a man named Al Darby, who was the informant in the Al-Nashiri case. But he wouldn't do this. And I believe that if we ever get to a trial and we ever get to the death penalty, there will be a member of that court, at least one. Look what happened in the case that just happened, where 7 of the 8 members of the jury, they're called members in the military, members, wrote to the judge and said, you know, we don't think there should be a long jail sentence here. In a way, I would rather see him tried in front of a military jury, frankly, because they will follow the law and they will be horrified at the torture if they can just get to see it.
So if I would like to take you to maybe that question though about, I mean, we know now that the investigation in Afghanistan, the prosecutor's not going to push forward any of the allegations against the United States. They're going to focus.
He's deprioritized them. Right, that's the word, right. Deprioritized.
Deprioritized. But what you said at the beginning about people who you wouldn't want to defend, I think a lot of people would say those are the people who are in the international criminal tribunals more generally, and you were still working with the defense lawyers. So I think, you know, I wonder if part of this is about sort of, did you go to the ICC because it's specifically about holding the United States accountable, and that's why you joined the prosecution? How does that differ, I guess, for you from the other international criminal tribunal cases that the people you worked with were involved in the defense.
Well, they were representing people, yes, who may have tortured other people, right, in other countries.
And at a high level too.
At a high level, that's true. But the people I'm working with are the people who represent Mr. Al-Nashiri. And we went there because it was an avenue that had opened. We didn't have anything to do with its opening. It was the prosecutor, the
Right.
previous prosecutor, Fato, who said, we're going to prosecute this Afghanistan situation, and we're going to include the Black sites that are members of the court. And so we saw the opening and jumped into it for our client, because he is a victim. Other people I know who I respect have represented other victims in the International Criminal Court, have represented people who've been charged with torture. Would I represent someone charged with torture? I don't know. You know, probably. As I said, except I don't know, not if they're members of the CIA, because I have a specific feeling about them. But generally, I would represent just about anyone in a criminal case to make sure that that person's rights were protected. Mm-hmm. There are some cases, and I think we all have them, that would be hard for me. For me, it would be killing animals. When I was in Botswana, they said that they had the death penalty for poachers. And I said, well, I'm against the death penalty, but I don't know, maybe not for people who shoot down big elephants. But, you know, I really am against the death penalty for anyone. I don't like anyone to go to jail. I think it's a mistake, all the people we put in jail. And I do think people who torture, for whatever reasons they do, suffer. If you want to hear somebody who suffers, there's a podcast, This American Life, and it's called An Invitation to Tea. And it's based on a film that John Getz did that I hope is going to be distributed in the US. And it's a film about where he interviewed the torturers in Mohamedou's case. He found Mr. X, who we could never find. Actually, Stu Couch found him. He interviewed him, and that is a sick man, let me tell you. He interviewed Richard Zuley, who I've just talked to you about, this Chicago cop who never got caught for all the people he put in jail. He interviewed a woman who still believes Mohamedou is guilty. And it's better if you can see, and he interviewed another guy who was tortured by what had happened. Steve Wood, who's the guard who's become Mohamedou's friend, something uplifting you might want to watch. It's hard to find uplifting things in this work, but if you watch the 20-minute documentary called My Brother's Keeper, that's on the Guardian's YouTube. You can find it on regular YouTube, but there's lots of My Brother's Keeper, but you'll recognize the little brown guy in the turban and the really white big guy who looks like a soldier next to him. That's Steve Wood, who was one of Mohamedou's guards after the torture time. He had nothing to do with torturing him, but he hated what they were doing there. And he's in the movie a little bit. You see someone named Steve, but it's an uplifting thing, and you can see how people can come together. It's very complicated, Karen. I just don't think there are easy answers for all this.
Right. Well, I appreciated at least thinking about some of the difficulties with international criminal law from the perspective of human rights, because I feel like we don't hear that enough. There are, and that This American Life, I just want a second. It's a really great listen, and I think somebody Ranjana added it to the chat. So we have a number of questions now, and this is sort of the more open period. And I'm inclined to let folks ask their own questions if they want. And I think when someone asks a question, if you'd like to chime in, just put an asterisk in the chat and say Galbraith's question, and then I'll know that you want to chime in on what he's discussing. So with that, Professor Galbraith, would you like to ask your question?
Sure, thank you. And I'm not a lawyer, so this is a somewhat naive question from a procedural point of view. But as I'm sure you know, in 2019, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture issued a report on the case of Julian Assange, which has established, I think, fairly persuasively that his treatment amounted to torture. And I'm wondering whether in the British system that you were describing, that has any bearing on the conduct of his case, or could be made to have bearing on the conduct of his case, on the outcome of his case, which is presently under appeal.
They've certainly raised it. His lawyers have certainly raised this, and the fact that he was essentially imprisoned in the embassy, and I was there. Didn't have any space much, little closet, but I mean he could roam around inside, and all the time he's been at the prison, Belmarsh. Yes, they've argued it. And, at this point, it's up to the Supreme Court of England, of the UK, whether they're going to hear the case. And that's where we are now.
All right, Carl, good to see you. Carl Webb.
Am I unmuted?
You are. And folks, keep sending in questions.
Yeah, this was an interesting movie for me because I was actually in the army in Germany at the same time that Mohamedou was, I guess, going to school there. But there was this one scene, I can't quote it verbatim, but there were two guys in civilian clothing. I guess they were FBI or CIA,
FBI, they were FBI.
Asking him about his past, and Mohamedou says something like "same," basically
Same side. He said same side.
Meaning that hey, you guys we were fighting the Soviets, and you were on the same side. And I remember when I joined the army in 1982. One day they allegedly brought in what was supposed to be a Soviet defector to give us a talk. And he was, talking about, the war in Afghanistan from the Soviet perspective. And, after it was all over, we were told, hey, those guys, those Islamic fighters are the freedom fighters. They're on our side. And I found out later, we sent them like billions of dollars, well into the 90s. So I was wondering how we define terrorism, because the same guys that we were fighting later, we were supporting in the 80s and the 90s. So did the definition of terrorism somehow evolve and change? Was he not a terrorist in 1988 when we were supporting the Islamic fundamentalists?
Well, you're absolutely right. He wasn't a terrorist. I could go into a long diatribe of why we shouldn't have the crime of terrorism, but we'll leave that for another day. But he's correct when he says that in the movie Same Side, because when he was there, we were fighting with him. You've all seen, or many of you have probably seen the movie Charlie Wilson's War. And that's about exactly what we did. We sent the money to the Pakistanis, huge billions of dollars. This is all public information now, for the Stinger missiles. And it was the Stinger missiles that ended that war because they could shoot down airplanes. And once they could shoot down the Soviet airplanes, the war pretty much came to an end. And Mohamedou left then. And he's always said, and there's no evidence to the contrary, that he left. When the Muslims were fighting each other and the warlords were fighting each other, he left. But you're absolutely right, Carl. It's not that the definition of terrorism changed. It's we decided later that these people were not fighting on our side and came up with a new story that they never were. that's the story now. But of course, it's not true.
So I have 3 questions in the queue. One that was just sent to me, but I'll call on all 3 of these folks. So Neville Hode, who is my co-director at the Rapoport Center and an English professor, has a literary question.
Mute.
You're muted.
Only 3 years on Zoom. I should know better. Thank you. This was really wonderful and informative and depressing, and I have a whole range of responses. But I mean, okay, we're talking about a film. You invoked that wonderful Sandburg poem. You've mentioned popular culture a number of times. So I'm just wondering how you see the potentials and the pitfalls of sort of genres of expressive culture in opposing torture, especially in a digital age where actually, I don't know, I mean, we all live in different informational universes. I think a popular culture sphere is unbelievably fragmented.
Yes, it is. But, you know, the reason we were interested in this movie is that a lot more people watch movies than read books in this, anywhere in the world, but certainly in this country. And now we're actually working on I'm working with some other movies which get into some of these subjects, one of which might be an animated movie, because now animated films for adults have become a big thing. And people watch them. You know, it started with the comics that, you know, Captain Fantastic or whoever he was, you know, Captain America and all those movies. I think there's a big place for popular culture to educate. And it certainly can educate, inform, and be entertainment at the same time. And I think that's important. I think it's important that we continue to make movies and TV series that, instead of being like, what was the one, you know, 24/7, the guy who tortured all people who looked just like my clients, and Zero Dark 30, which was just a fundamental lie. But if we can tell the truth in movies, and if we can tell it in a way that people will listen and learn, I think it's a great way to do it.
So Sabrina Barton has a question that I think is maybe a but. So do you want to ask that, Sabrina?
I'm not sure it's a but, having listened to Nancy's reply to Neville, because I 100% agree that popular culture genres can bring to a much vaster audience ways of understanding something that they would otherwise not have any encounter with at all. And I don't have a problem with things being packaged in a genre way to accomplish that. But my question did relate to things being packaged in a genre way with Stuart Couch, who was made into such a prominent and sympathetic character. He's repelled by the torture, and there was so much cross-cutting between the Jodie Foster, Nancy Hollander scenes and his scenes, that you became kind of equal moral consciences. And I wondered if that really softened the military, you know, the critique of the military.
Well, I don't know. You could ask someone else. I mean, it's certainly, you know, the military is not all bad.
Right.
And maybe that's what it taught us. On Al-Nashiri's case, we have military lawyers. We have a captain in the Navy. A captain in the Navy is just below admiral. I mean, it's a big deal. And this is a ship where 17 sailors were killed. And our client is accused of being the mastermind. Now, whether he is or he isn't, you know, we've had Marines on the defense. We've Air Force in the defense. We've had Army. We've had Coast Guards, and they're wonderful people to work with and serious lawyers. We have one guy who started out as a Navy SEAL and then decided he was on the wrong side, and now he's one of Mr. Al-Nashiri's lawyers. I think it's important to understand that the military can serve and can do something that's good, and that they're not all evil torturers, just like all cops are not evil Richard Zulis. But you know, it's interesting that you say that. No one else has ever said what you just said, Sabrina, that it softened the military. I think it showed him as a very hardened, tough guy, which is what he is, but who said, my conscience says I can't do this. And, you know, we all know from history the people who've done that. The guy in Vietnam who turned his guns on the soldiers, I'm losing my memory of that horrible case in Vietnam, but he turned and said, excuse me?
It was at My Lai.
Yes, it was at My Lai. And he turned his guns and said, anybody does anything else and I'm going to shoot you. You know, they're out there. We want to have more of them, and we would like to not have them on 150 countries in the world. This is a, you know, we have military troops on the ground in 150 countries in the world. Some of them are secret, clandestine. There are only about 200 countries in the world. We're a strong military government in this. It's a strong and serious part of our government, and we have to do everything we can to make it human.
Yeah, I respect your answer and the need to show nuance and complexity.
Yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. So Michael Tiger, I had asked if he might want to say something about the Assange case, and it seems he is willing to do that, and also has a question about the Holy Land case, and that might take us to the end.
Now pending before the United Kingdom Supreme Court is the latest round of the Assange litigation. And my colleague and partner Jane Tiger and I were expert witnesses for the defense in front of Judge Paritzer initially. The question is going to be whether the assurances the United States is giving about conditions of confinement and other matters are going to allow the UK Supreme Court to say, okay, we'll let him go. And we hope also they'll look back at the fact that this prosecution is not only a violation of the First Amendment and of the statutes, but also of the European Convention on Human Rights, which the UK is bound to enforce, and we talked about. The trouble with the assurances the United States has offered is that once he gets back to the United States, those might very well be held non-justiciable. And unless the Brits want to sue, they wouldn't be enforceable. But my question is this, Nancy, suppose I want to support the Palestinian cause or the cause of justice in the Middle East, not like Mohamedou, but I want to support it right here in the United States. In your experience, might I be likely to confront a remorselessly hostile judge with a kind of moral and legal obliquity who would relentlessly attack the lawyer that I had representing me? And might I then be subjected to a trial where the government witnesses would be anonymous and difficult to cross-examine? Could such a thing happen in the United States?
Well, as you know, Michael, such a thing did happen. That was the Holy Land case. And my client is serving, Shukri Abu Bakr is serving 65 years for the crime of feeding children. He was never, the crime is material support to Hamas, but he was never accused, tried, or convicted of a single act of violence. All he did was feed children. You're right, we had an anonymous expert in that case who said when Josh Draytell was cross-examining him, Josh was one of the lawyers on the case. This was a rare conspiracy case where everyone actually worked together, all the defendants. And Josh said, he said, well, you say you're a lawyer for the Shin Bet, but you could be a Mossad agent and we wouldn't know. And Avi, which is how we knew him, said, yes, you cannot research me. He was an expert. He was the expert who said, I know it's Hamas because I can smell it as Hamas. It's a quote.
That Fifth Circuit opinion, which is ghastly, is really worth reading.
Ghastly.
Yes.
I also wrote an article, if anyone's interested, about the whole history of the Holy Land case, and it goes into all of this, explains it all. It's you know, I've got it. It's out there, and I did it. It was a lecture, and I was glad I did it because now when I can't remember it, I have it all. So if anyone's interested, just let me know.
So Nancy, we have about a minute left. Is there something we've missed that you want to tell us all?
You know, go out there and do good. You know, lawyers can create miracles. We have enormous power. We have more power. You know, plumbers work on the plumbing and doctors fix some little thing in your hand or your face. We have everything, the whole client, the whole world, everything. And we can create change. And, you know, I know it's glum. It's particularly glum when we talk about some of these things, but we shouldn't give up. That's why I think you should watch My Brother's Keeper and smile at the end of it, which you will. And know that you can go out there and make a difference in people's lives. You know, Mohamedou would still be in jail if we hadn't continued, and we will eventually get the Holy Land people out.
And that we talked about this before you came, but the end of the film, you know, is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. So that also that we could smile in watching Mohamedou himself was really important. So I can't believe that we've gone 75 minutes and have not given you a big applause. So we will do that now, and you'll just have to pretend you're hearing it all. This was a spectacular event, and I really hope we can get you back to spend more time with us and have smaller and larger conversations. But it was great that people were able to join us from across the country too. So thanks again to the Human Rights Law Society and all of the folks who made this happen. And of course, to the audience, and most of all to you, Nancy, not just for being here, but for your work.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you.